Monday, and that means it's time for another episode of the Daily Berg. Today, I want to try and keep it pretty short. I just want to suggest to you that you have the ability to have peace in a storm, and it's not peace in the Buddhist sense of I will let the fire consume me and be totally chill about it because if I'm burned up, whatever. It's not the lack of affection for physical existence. It's not the lack of acknowledgement of problems. This peace is there because you have the ability to overcome the circumstances you're facing. So Jesus feeds the multitudes. He gets the lunchbox from the kids. It's got the tiny fish from I can't even remember where that is. It's near the Dead Sea. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Kids got a lunchbox full of tiny fish and a couple of fist-sized loaves of bread, and Jesus has several thousand people in front of him. He takes the lunch that the kid offers, and he blesses it, hands it to the disciples. And again, understand at this point, it's still the same amount that was in that lunchbox when Jesus is handing it to the disciples. But the disciples start to disperse it, and the food is multiplied in their hands, and it feeds that whole crowd, and then they end up with buckets of leftovers afterwards. Later that same day, the disciples are heading from one side of the lake to the other in a boat. Jesus has gone off to do his own thing. They see him later. He's walking on the water in the midst of this storm. The disciples are afraid already because of the storm. They're more afraid when they see this guy walking on the water. But Jesus approaches, steps into the boat, and says to them, "Peace." And the waves stop, the storm calms, and Jesus comforts them. But in the midst of comforting them, it says that the disciples, that they were amazed at what Jesus had just done, but that they didn't understand the loaves and the fishes because their hearts were hard. There's a fantastic book called The Supernatural Power of a Transformed Mind, and it's by Bill Johnson. It's got a solid piece actually about exactly what I'm talking about today. Bill may, in fact, have been the first person that I heard speak on it. He's a rad dude. Check him out. So why is it important that their hearts were hardened? Like, why does the story cap with that? Because the food wasn't multiplied in Jesus' hands. It says that he blessed the food that the kid had brought him. He broke it into 12 small portions, handed it to the disciples, and then as they passed the food out, it was multiplied in their hands. And what that means is that God was blessing what was going on to the extent where it was a reasonable expectation that the disciples would understand that he wanted to work through them. So when they faced this storm, they weren't going to die if Jesus wasn't there because God was upon them to move through them. The expectation was that I'll work through you. Just do the work. Use what you have. Pass it out. Do your thing. And I'll bless what you do. Now, I'm not trying to write that into some weird thing where we get to use God's power manipulatively, genie in a bottle, but there is something to that notion in the sense that the gifts and callings of God are irrevocable. And we know that some people are walking in some nasty stuff while still doing miracles. It's like, teacher, didn't we cast out demons and do all this stuff in your name? Depart from me, I never knew you. It's like, that's a big deal. And it's there because the work is not a guarantee of presence. But God has given people his presence. He's acknowledged that he's with them and did so with the disciples. Set up a precedent for them to not be afraid of the circumstances that came next. But because the disciples weren't looking at that miracle as a new lens to see through, but rather just something to incorporate into their old lives, they were still afraid in the midst of the storm rather than overcoming it. So I want to suggest to you that when God's doing something with you, when he's blessing you, when you're watching him just shake up a life, that's a lens then. That testimony can become something that you're supposed to see the rest of life through. Because the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Which is to say, when you're talking about it, when it's something that's coming up in your thought life and in your relationships, you are giving yourself and those people the opportunity to see God do before you, for those people in current, present time, what he did for you back then. Or what he did for other people then. Look at what's already happened in your lives with Holy Spirit. Look at what's already gone down between you and God. The good stuff, not the stuff that's kind of weird and wonky, the things that you're like, well, why didn't God show up here? Why didn't he show up there? He's love. He's love. Anything that authors him as something else is a misunderstanding. And I'm sorry if that steps on toes. I love you. I'm not trying to shut you down. But seriously, He's either love or he's not. And if he's not, but he says he is, he's a liar. And if he's a liar, he's not really God. So if God is love, and love keeps no record of wrongs, doesn't seek its own, always hopes, always protects and fights for and takes care of, then we can't make God the author of suffering, sickness, death, and destruction. You can quote Old Testament to me all you want, and I understand where you're coming from, but even the Old Testament supposedly points to the life of Jesus according to Jesus. So anything that doesn't look like Jesus in the Old Testament, like any character, ideology, or things that I'm trying to attach to God as an attribute, if I can't find it in the life of Jesus, I guarantee you I'm not understanding what I'm reading in the Old Testament correctly. So all that to say, use what testimony you have as an expectation for what happens moving forward. You've watched God move, watch him move again. And watch him top what he did last time, because it's always further up and further in. He's got this stuff covered, and he loves you. He's a good dad, and he's very affectionate towards his kids because that's how good dads are. So I bless you guys in Jesus' name. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow.